All right. So let us. Everyone's okay on your side of the pond.
Yeah.
Good to go.
Yeah.
And
Golokananda, are you taking another Bhakti Shastri course also?
oh no, that a mistake. I was supposed to
Y-
forward it to my history file. I just did it
Oh, wow.
to the WhatsApp. Sorry, I was just going through my stuff.
Can you say that again?
I was going through my, through my all my notes. Instead of forwarding it to my Bhakti Sastri, I forwarded to the Bhakti Sastri WhatsApp.
Because we were starting, Madhavendra and I were starting to get jealous that you're taking another Bhakti Shastri. Wow. Whew.
Prabhu, how was your podcast this morning?
It went well. I think the devotees in South Africa liked it. We spoke, about reincarnation, children who claim to remember their past lives. I really have to give all my thanks to Brigupati Prabhu. I showed you his picture before, and because as I explained in the podcast, I actually did a slide presentation. I'll show you what I have. This is the thing I have. It's really thanks to him because can you see my screen here?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, Brigu, when I was living in the LA ashram, he was a big fan of the author of Forbidden Archaeology and Alien Identities, who passed away about 10 years ago, Sadaputa Prabhu.
Yeah.
And so through their teaching or through their books, he became really fascinated with the topic of children who claim to remember their past lives. And I remember he would just constantly tell me to read Ian Stevenson's books and stuff, and he gave me this very specific instruction, like you should preach or make presentations making the link between children who claim to remember their past lives and the Vedic paradigm. And so so I kind of talked about how children who claim to remember their past lives falls into a category of what we could call rogue phenomena that don't fit into the typical physicalist paradigm, and how physicalism basically cannot accommodate such phenomena. And so what does the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavatam have to say about that? And so then I delve into Ian Stevenson and his work at the Division of Perceptual Studies, and his followers after his death, and how they have all these cases of children who remember their past lives. So we go into a particular case with this James Leiniger, who's this amazing kid who has an amazing story of remembering the life of a pilot in World War II, and how other kids, with birthmarks of death, this kid, for example, it's not him, but there's this kid in Israel. He claims that he was killed by having some guy. He named the name of the person who hit him with an axe on his head and killed him by breaking his skull and his skin. And so the kid was born with a birthmark, and then he took the team to the forest where his body was buried, and they dug out the bones of his previous body, and the skull was broken exactly in the same spot where the kid had a birthmark, right? So this type of phenomena, goes against the idea of physicalism, and these ideas that basically say that when you die, that's it. There's no survival of consciousness. So then I just kind of asked the question that Brigupati Prabhu, framed, which is a great question. Is like, okay, if you look at different worldviews out there, starting with physicalism, what worldview accommodates children who claim to remember their past lives the best? So a few words on Christianity, and obviously you're destined to, you die once, and then the judgment. So Christianity doesn't work, and Islam doesn't work also so well, and Judaism maybe a little bit, and Buddhism somewhat. Then I show them a clip of a movie by Martin Scorsese about the Dalai Lama and how the Dalai Lama was discovered. But the problem with the Buddhists is that they don't believe in the soul, just like the Dalai Lama says here.
Atma, others want you. You believe Atma. Buddhists believe anatma.
Could you hear that? He says, the Buddhists believe in anatma, or no soul. So, well, then who gets the karma, right? And so then, gradually we go to the Vedic paradigm of, that we're atmas con carne, not chili con carne, but almas con carne. And then, some key verses from the Bhagavad Gita about how the soul changes bodies, like, we change clothes, and how the subtle body carries the soul from one body to the other. And this is where we get into the whole idea of samskars, like impressions left on the subtle body in one life that sort of manifests in the next life, or this notion of remembering or reconnecting to a past lives, remembrance or understanding, either spiritually or even materially. I mean, this kid, for example, he's a 9-year-old kid, this kid in Australia, and look how he plays guitar. I mean, you watch stuff like that, you're like, oh no, this is, this must be a past life remembrance. And there's some really cool verses from the third canto of the Bhagavatam that I only thought of recently. In the third canto, Kapila Dev is preaching to his mother, right? And he's talking about the passage of the living entity, and how some souls, Prabhupada mentioned some fortunate souls, when they're actually in the womb, they don't necessarily remember, their past body, but they have a flash of like Krishna conscious awareness, and they pray to the Lord. And there's these beautiful prayers, like, for example, this one where the kid, the human soul, as the Bhagavatam says, therefore, without being agitated anymore, I shall deliver myself from the darkness of nescience with the help of my friend, clear consciousness. Simply by keeping the lotus feet of Lord Vishnu in my mind, I shall be saved from entering into the wombs of many mothers for repeated birth and death. So the key is, meditating on Krishna at the time of death, because he says in the 8th chapter, you'll see a little bit later in 8.6, yam yam vapi smaram bhavam tyajyatante kalevaram. Whatever state of being you remember at the time of death, you attain that state without fail. And interestingly enough, the Bhagavatam tells us the story of Bharat Maharaj. Who doesn't know the story of Jad Bharat or Bharat Maharaj?
I don't know if I do.
And what about Jacob G?
Not off top, no.
Well, briefly, it's the story of this king, this pious Krishna conscious king, who lives a very nice Krishna conscious life. Towards the end of his life, he goes to the forest, to kind of to renounce the world and focus on the last phase of his life, to try to focus on Krishna. And one day he goes to the river, and there's this pregnant deer who is drinking water, and then some lion like creeps up behind her, and out of fear she jumps into the river and gives birth to her fawn. And in the river she drowns and dies, and the lion disappears, and then this sage is left with this baby fawn, and he makes the decision to take care of the fawn. And the story goes that he just went totally overboard in his affection for the fawn.
He gets super attached, right?
Totally attached, so much so that at the end of his life, when he died, he thought of the deer, of the fawn, and sure enough, boom, in his next body, he was in the body of a deer. But somehow there was a blessing attached to that, namely that he was able to remember his past life as a human. And one point I make, which I think is interesting, is that imagine if we could have the technique of being able to hypnotize or to go into the past memories of animals. Because, just as there's human beings who remember past lives, logically there must be animals also who sometimes remember past lives, especially if they had a violent death. And as we know, sometimes a human can go into an animal body right after death, especially if the humans acted very sinfully. So there's probably cases not just in the Bhagavad Purana but also in real life. I mean, not to say that Srimad Bhagavatam is not real life, but like recent history on planet Earth of animals who remember their past lives. And so this deer, remembering, like, can you imagine? You're like about to go back, you're like almost there, and then you're like, oh shucks, I'm in a freaking deer body now, and I gotta live an entire life in a goddamn deer body. I can't even like hold things anymore. Just I gotta walk on 4 legs, for your whole life. You can imagine how frustrating that is. But it's described that he would hang out near sages in their, who were like recite mantras and do kirtan. And so he would like stay close so he could hear them and stay close to Krishna consciousness while in a deer body, which is indicative also because how important it is to stay close to Krishna Katha, to topics about Krishna, hearing about Krishna. Otherwise, our Krishna consciousness goes down. So the story goes, he lived his entire life as a deer, obviously, and then when the deer body died, he took birth again as a human being, as the son of a Brahmana called Jad Bharat. And there he was like, you know what? I learned my lesson. I ain't playing with fire. I'm just going to pretend I'm dumb and deaf. So he spent his entire life pretending to be dumb and deaf so that, no one would bother him. No one would, encourage him to get married or to get involved in business. Or obviously this is an extreme example. I made the point that, 99% of Vaishnavas get married and pay taxes and have their career and their children and everything. And if they do that in Krishna consciousness, it's 100% legit. But here's an extreme example is there to teach us that ultimately though Krishna not artificial, not necessarily renouncing the world, but being attached to Krishna in whatever situation you're in, which is real renunciation, as we know, is the key factor. But he just went kind of extreme and didn't even want to go into householder life or family life or money making life or anything. He just played dumb. And so at the end of the Jad Bharat story, he gets hired as a palanquin carrier of this king called King Rahugana. And then at one point, Jad Bharat doesn't want to step on some ants, so he avoids the ants. But by doing so, he makes the palanquin of the king move, and so the king gets angry at him. And why are you doing this? And that's when there's these famous instructions by Jad Bharat to King Rahugana, who by the end, offers his obeisances to him and begs him for his mercy, right? And so I conclude basically, what's the big freaking deal? The big deal is that if, the parts of the Bhagavad Gita talk about the existence of the soul and the eternality of the soul, and if those things seem to be, verified by empirical science, namely these, rogue phenomena of children who remember their past lives or out-of-body experiences or near-death experiences, then we should have some provisional faith in the parts of our scriptures that do and probably will never have the type of empiric evidence that may exist for, the existence of consciousness as, different from the body. For example, the existence of Goloka Vrindavan, right? And the idea that there's a spiritual world called Goloka, and there in the center of it, there's Radha Krishna with their eternal associates who all have, eternal spiritual bodies. If one part of our scriptures say that there's a soul, and that seems to be, corroborated by modern science, then perhaps the other parts are true as well. And so therefore we should have, all the more faith that what these scriptures tell us is true. Including, what happens after death if we think of Krishna, and therefore we should all join together and chant Hare Krishna. So that was basically the gist of it. And some devotees liked it, I guess. So it's a cool topic.
It is a cool topic.
All right, let's go over our questions. Shall we? Let's start with question number 1. And what I'll do is I'll ask whoever's inspired, and if it's the same devotee answering each time, we'll take turns. But I'll kind of leave it a little bit open when it comes to the answer. Who feels inspired to if this question particularly touched the nerve in you, then feel free to reply. So what's super significant? It's actually 212, by the way. It's not 211. But what's significant about the fact that Krishna talks about all souls being eternal, even for the future? You know what I'm talking about here, right? 212. Can we all go to 212? And once again, please forgive me for being, 45 minutes late. I'm really sorry with this daylight savings thing. It had to be today, it could have been like Saturday or Monday.
In Arizona, we're like completely oblivious to daylight savings because we don't even practice it at all.
Really, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish I was in the States, actually. I think I'm going to spend some years in France, but ultimately I want to, be based back where I was born, and, in the States, and come to France to maybe to travel and preach if Krishna allows. But anyway, so are we all on 212?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings. Okay, that's pretty clear. So in the past, we were all eternal, right? But what's significant about Krishna saying in the future, we will all continue to be? And what's implied is, well, what is implied? Anyone want to answer that?
The soul.
You were going to say something, Golokananda Priya?
I think the soul continues to exist even when the body is destroyed. It's gone.
Okay.
Like we.
But there's something that's good, but in the purport, actually, Prabhupada makes an important point.
So in the purport, Prabhupada touches on the fact on the Mayavadi theory of impersonal liberation.
You see, sorry to interrupt you, but yeah, you're spot on. And so Golokananda Priya, Jacob is referring to let's see, one.
Yeah, I found it.
You found it, the Maya, exactly, the Mayavadi theory. So please tell us, Jacob.
Well, so anyways, the Mayavadi theory is that when we reach the highest level of enlightenment, that we'll merge back into Brahman. But this verse right here is telling us that we will always be individual souls. And so it kind of blows a hole in that theory.
That we will always be individuals even after what?
After liberation.
Even after liberation. That's really important. Even after liberation. So in liberation from?
Samsara.
From samsara, exactly. Right. So the Vaishnavacharyas would claim that this verse is sort of an authoritative argument for spiritual individuality, right? Which actually ties into this thing from, again, children who claim to remember their past lives, boom, right there, like where we keep being individuals. And it's obviously an individual who gets the karma in the next life or who remembers one's past life. Otherwise, if we all become some big blob, then, you could still argue, think about it, Jacob, you could still argue that while in samsara, there's a so-called semblance of an individual soul, and the karma goes to that semblance of an individual soul. But when it's all over, you merge into some white light. In other words, you could still wiggle your way around and say, well, it doesn't, just because there's individuality in this phenomenal world doesn't necessarily mean that after liberation, not after reincarnating into another body, but after full-fledged exiting the samsara cycle, that there has to be individuality, right?
Is that how they reconcile, like, for example, the Dalai Lama being the same soul?
I don't know, man. I don't know how they figure that out, because there's the Mayavadis, the non-dualist Hindus, the followers of Shankaracharya, what we would call the Mayavadis, and then there's the Voidists, such as the Zen Buddhists or the Tibetan Buddhists. At least in the Mayavadi concept, there's an idea of Brahman being, temporarily distributed in individual units, right? But ultimately merging back into the ocean, like rivers flow into the ocean, right? But in the Buddhist idea, you heard Dalai Lama explicitly say, we believe in the anatma philosophy. So who gets the karma? I remember, this is one of the things I remember from Hridayananda Maharaj gave this really cool series at the University of Florida during 2 semesters, actually, called the History of Indian Religions. And when he was, talking about Buddhism, he raised this really, I think, really important philosophical point. If there is no individual person, right, who survives physical death and who enters into another body, then what enters into another body? Like, how are they able to recognize who the Lama is if it's not this, And then who gets the karma, especially? If karma is being generated, well, the question is then who generates the karma in one body and who gets the karma in the next body if there's no individual self? Remember in Bhagavad Gita 13:21. Let me go here and show you. Not show you, just, go to it here. Let me go. If you can all go to 3:21. At 3:21, Krishna makes this really important, really, really, really important statement. in 321, Krishna talks about nature, okay? And he talks about us, he talks about the soul. This is one of my favorite verses, actually. Right? And the Sanskrit is Purusha. Purusha, what does Purusha mean? Remember, we did talk about that a little bit? Or we're right in it right now. Purusha means the soul, the individual soul. That's one of the ways Krishna calls us in the Bhagavad Gita. In numerous places, Krishna calls us Purusha. Okay? And here he says Purusha, right? So the Purusha, the individual soul, Sukha Dukkha. Sukha means what? Golokananda.
It means, happiness, like
Yeah, Sukha
happiness,
means happiness. And Dukkha means?
distress.
Distress, unhappiness. And Bhoktritve, right? The instrument. So in other words, I mean, I'm not a Sanskrit scholar, but the point is, here's the translation. Keep it really simple. The living entity, Prabhupada says, the living entity, in other words, you or me, is the cause of the various suffering and enjoyments, right? The soul alone is responsible for the experience of happiness and distress. So it has to, happiness and distress means quote unquote good or quote unquote bad karma, right? So if someone is, doing good to someone, good to the world, then logically, when that soul leaves that body and incarnates into another body, assuming, it didn't go back to the spiritual world, then who gets the good karma? Who gets the reaction? Sorrel?
I don't know, sorry.
The individual soul who did it, right? Like right now, let's say you're not a devotee and you build, 100 hospitals, right? And you take birth again as a human being. Who's going to reap the good karma of the 100 hospitals you just built? You're going to get the reaction. Nobody else but yourself experiences the reaction of your karma. Of course, there's, maybe if you open, let's say 100 hospitals, obviously there's people who are going to benefit from, a hospital being there, right? But in terms of getting pious credit for doing this and therefore enjoying pious karma, only you get that because you did the action. And similarly, you murder someone, who's going to have to suffer for that murder in the next life?
Still you.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what Krishna is saying here in 1321. The living entity is the cause of the various sufferings and enjoyments in this world. So coming back to your question, Jacob G, if you're talking about reincarnation minus a concept of a soul, I really do not have an answer. I really do not have an answer. Therefore, it's flawed, I would say. And so someone might say, well, it's just semantics, it's just language. They're talking about the pristine mind or something like that. But when you dig a little deeper, you ask, a Zen Buddhist or Tibetan Buddhist, do you actually believe in a personal God? And what's the answer, Vignesh? What will they say? Do you actually believe that there's a Supreme Father?
Yeah, I think normally consider the Father, but they don't believe in the personal God still. It's like contradictory kind of things.
Can you say that again?
I think normally they talk about the Supreme Father and all those things, but still I think there is a contradiction. They don't believe in the personal God.
Incorporeal, you said. Nirankar.
Yeah, Nirankar. But that would be more the impersonalists. But you tell them like there's a Supreme Lord, like a Supreme Father. You quote them Krishna where he says, Aham bija pradak pita. Sarva yonishu konteya aham bija pradak pita. What does that mean, Vignesh?
I'm the seed-giving father of all the living entities.
Yeah, Sarva Yonishu. Of all the yonis, and I'm the seed-giving father. He literally uses the word pita. What does pita mean? Father, right?
Yeah.
So aham bijak pradak pita. I am the seed-giving father in all living, of all living beings, in all wombs. Zen Buddhists will never agree to that. Tibetan Buddhists will never agree to that. So It's kind of convenient. You got reincarnation. Who gets the karma? We don't know. We're just going to kind of juggle words about it. So I mean, I have very little sympathy for that philosophy. You know, we accept Buddha as an avatar of Krishna. So like the person Buddha, we offer all respects to. You know, Jayadev Goswami glorifies Buddha in his song, you know, in his Dasavatar Stotram. And that's actually one of the things that I loved when I became a devotee. I was like, because I was really into Buddhism at first before I met devotees. And I was like, wow, cool. Like, you know, I didn't phrase it like I'm phrasing it now, but I was thinking, wow, the Vaishnavas, you know, have appropriated Buddha into their own tradition. Or in other words, Buddha is part of, you know, the Vaishnava tradition. And he's mentioned, right, in one of the as one of the avatars in the third or one of the chapters of the first canto of the Bhagavatam is one of the avatars, right? But the philosophy, I mean, what did Prabhupada, first of all, who wrote the pranam mantra to Prabhupada? Namaste Sarasvati Devi Gauravani Pracharine. Who wrote that? Do you know? Interesting.
I thought Prabhupada wrote it himself.
Yeah, very good point. And so what's the second line of it? A third line.
Nirvishesha Shunyavadi.
Namaste Sarasvati Devi Gauravani Pracharine. Yeah, sorry, the last two lines. You got it. Nirvishesha Shunyavadi. Paschatya Desha Tarine. You know, he's come to rid the Western world of what two things, Jacob?
Personalism and voidism.
Impersonalism and voidism. So I mentioned this because, you know, I don't know if you saw, did you see a little, like, I'll show you. I want to share this with you because I think it's cute, but some devotee kind of like, oh, you're making fun of the Dalai Lama. But I made this like tiny little short video where you know, there was an interview between Gaur Gopal. That clip I showed you is part of a larger interview with Gaur Gopal, and at one point Gaur Gopal kind of throws him a jab that he says, you know, your holiness, your smile is so beautiful. It's like it's coming directly from your soul. I'm sure he did that on purpose. It must be. And then you see that Dana was like with a blank, you know, like, what do you mean? You know, like, hey, we believe in anatma, you know. So look at this. This is pretty good. Huh? What'd you say? Oh, that was Gaur Gopal speaking. Here, check this out. This is kind of, I mean, I think this is cute.
When you smile from the core of your soul. You know, it's not like a plastic smile at all. Your smile is radiant. You smile from the core of your soul.
And the meme is when the Dalai Lama hears he has a soul. So yeah, so one devotee was like, you know, this is, you know, it's not correct, it's not proper to make fun of the representative Buddha. And I'm like, dude, like, you can't just say there's no soul, you know? Come on, that's total nirvishesh, that's total impersonal, not even verse, that's voidism to the max, you know? So yeah, we believe in the individuality of the soul even after liberation, and so what happens to the soul, just to finish on this topic, because it's important, it's a big topic in our theology. What theory comes in here now? What doctrine? The idea, there's a specific thing which Rupa Goswami is famously known in the world for having contributed. There's a specific notion here. Come on. No. Talking about the soul, right? The soul being an individual after liberation. So what happened? What, you know, where does that soul go, and what's up with the soul? And
where does the soul go after liberation?
Yeah, well, that would be Goloka Vrindavan, right? Especially if you're a Gaudiya Vaishnava. But then, what does Rupa Goswami say about the different kinds of relationships a soul can have with Krishna? Servant, okay, but then some souls have, that's a good point. Yes, Jivera Sarup whole, that's Kaviraj Goswami says that, but okay, does Rasa Tattva mean anything? Rasa Tattva. The truth.
We all have an individual relationship with the Lord.
Yeah, and an individual relationship in different rasas, right? And that's why, like, for example, we're in Kartik month. So what relationship does Mother Yashoda have with Krishna?
Parental.
Parental. So that jiva, that soul who plays the role of Krishna's mother, has an eternal relationship with Krishna in the rasa of, you had it.
What's
Yeah, vatsalya. No, that's friendship.
the friendship? Okay.
Madhurya is conjugal. No, you're right, vatsalya. Sakya is friendship.
Yeah, is friendship.
I'm
That's
sorry. I forgive me. So here, we go far with this, and a sort of a part B to this presentation you can make about children to remember their past lives, and this is where you can say, hey, this liberation, so-called liberation into the white light, although it may be an option, because we do believe Krishna's kind and he does give that option, but devotees don't want it, right? Like devotees say, I would rather be in a cage, surrounded by fire than to lose my individuality. Why? Because you have this whole thing about how, Narottam Das, this whole thing of Siddha Sarup, of, having your original form revealed to you, right? And what form are most of our acharyas in? This is getting esoteric, but you should, you're definitely mature enough to know this. Narottam Das Thakur, Rupa Goswami, Jiva Goswami, what's their eternal rasa with Krishna? In their spiritual forms. Yeah. Do you follow Sorel and Jacob G? They have forms of manjaris, right? Of 9-year-old young girls who are assisting, Lalita and Vishaka, who are assisting Radharani to unite with Krishna, right? And there's these far out stories, especially in the story of Narottam Das Thakur, there's a book by Satyaraj that if you guys have the time, it's really, really interesting. It's called Vaishnava Saints, and it was written by Satyaraj Prabhu, where he talks about three very famous Vaishnavas who came basically a century or two after Lord Chaitanya, and one is Srinivasacharya, the other is Narottam Das Thakur, and the other is, I forget, I always forget the last one.
Shamananda.
Yeah, Shamananda. And so there's these amazing stories, like for example, in Srinivasacharya's life, and this is relevant. We are here on 212, this is really important. Satyaraj tells the story that he collected from authorized sources, of how Srinivasacharya went into deep meditation, so much so that for like 3 days he didn't like, he was barely breathing and he wasn't eating or drinking or anything. And he had 2 wives. His 2 wives started freaking out and they thought he was going to die, and so they called Shamananda Pandit, his really, really good friend, and they're like, our husband's going to die, you got to do something. So he came, and as soon as he saw Srinivasacharya, he was like, don't worry, ladies, your husband's doing just fine. He's just deeply absorbed in samadhi. And so it's described that Srinivasacharya, even though, in his male human body form was sitting like this, but in his spiritual eternal form of a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old Manjari in Goloka Vrindavan, was assisting and playing in a lake or in a pond with Radharani and the Sakis. And at one point, Radharani lost her nose ring in the water, and it fell to the bottom of the pond. And so and it was kind of time to go. And so one of the senior manjaris told this manjari, who in this human body is Srinivasacharya, hey, go look for this nose ring. And so time in the material world dilates as you go up and up in the higher planets. Like Brahma's one day is however how many hundreds of millions of years down here, right? So you can imagine there must be a similar sort of phenomena in the spiritual world where literally time doesn't exist, right? So the time for that manjari to dive into the water to look for the for the nose ring of Radharani, 3 days elapse on earth. And so Shamananda Pandit comes, and it's described that he sat down right next to his friend Srinivasacharya, closed his eyes, and in his manjari body was able to enter into the same pastime. he entered into the same pastime, and there he or she dove into the water also to help her friend find Radharani's nose ring. And it's described that she lifted a lotus leaf that was at the bottom of the pond, and the ring was underneath. And so she got up out of the water, gave it to Srinivasacharya in his Manjari form, who then gave it to Lalita, who turned around and put it on Radharani's nose just as Radharani was all fully dressed and ready to go. And it's described that at that point, back on earth, both Srinivasacharya and Shamananda opened their eyes and looked at each other and just started laughing and crying and embracing, right? So you can see, like, this theory of Swarup, that each soul has an eternal form, can go really, really, really far. Really, really far, right? It doesn't stop at liberation when we become one. Each soul has an eternal Swarup. Prabhupada was not so much into the mood of talking about Swarups and revealing Swarups. You know that famous saying, work now, samadhi later? That was a famous statement by Prabhupada, work now, samadhi later. And that came about in connection with this idea of, getting really absorbed in trying to figure out what is one's, Swarup. My Diksha guru, Bhakti Charuswami, he often told the story of how he witnessed one time in 1977, I guess a few weeks or a few months before Prabhupada passed away, how one disciple of Prabhupada came to Prabhupada and said, Prabhupada, can you please tell me what is my Swarup? Like, you would think it's kind of a legit question. Like, okay, I believe that my soul is eternal, that I'm a soul and I have an eternal relationship with Krishna. What is it? Like, am I a 13-year-old manjari? Am I a bird? Am I an eternal cow? Am I a pillow on which Krishna, lays his head? What's my eternal Swarup? And Bhakti Swami recalls that when Prabhupada heard that, he got so angry that he looked at this devotee and his bottom lip started to quiver. And the only thing that could come out of his mouth was, you rascal, your Siddha Swarup. You rascal, your Siddha Swarup. You rascal, your Siddha Swarup. He said it 3 times. That's the only, he was so pissed, or so, that's the only thing that couldn't come out of his mouth. And after a few moments, after saying it a 3rd time, he calmed down a little bit. And according to Bhakti Charuswami, Prabhupada told him, don't worry about your Siddha Swarup. When you are qualified, I myself will reveal what is your Siddha Swarup. So in ISKCON, and you can trace that back to Bhakti Vinod, it's Bhakti Siddhanta for sure. I mean, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, they didn't even allow his disciples to read the Gita Govinda, and because some of Jayadev Goswami's writings are too transcendently, conjugal and too intimate in terms of descriptions of the intimate pastimes of Radha and Krishna. And Prabhupada was very much, work now. So like and what does it mean to work now? It means to engage in Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement, to spread Krishna consciousness. That's what work now means. And the idea is like, don't worry about your Swarup. Work now, samadhi later. And there's this famous verse actually that Prabodhananda Saraswati said that, again, Bhakti Charuswami used to quote a lot. I know this verse because he used to quote a lot, where Prabodhananda, who's an associate of Lord Chaitanya, prayed Yata Yata Gaura Padara Vinde Binde to Bhakti Krita Punjarashi. Then there's 2 other lines which I forget. And the translation though it's really cool. He says to the degree that you become absorbed in serving Lord Chaitanya, Lord Chaitanya's mission, the spreading of Krishna consciousness, to that degree you will find out, you will realize all of a sudden that your heart has become inundated with the nectar that is emanating from the lotus feet of Srimati Radharani. Right? So really esoteric stuff. Like, so, don't worry so much about what your Swarup is. And I'm sure you guys are not like biting your nails. Like, what am I in the spiritual world? Am I a gopi or am I a cowherd boy? I'm pretty sure that's not your preoccupation, but it can be for some devotees, and it was. And the mood in ISKCON, from what I gather and from Prabhupada's purports, is really much like, just engage in service, follow the 4 regulative principles, chant 16 rounds, wake up early, serve the mission somehow or other, spread Krishna consciousness, spread the holy name, spread the teachings of Krishna to others, and your Swarup will be revealed in due course. But this very idea of Swarup is totally cool when it comes to this idea of individuality of the soul. 212, right? Okay, let's go to 213. We did 1 verse out of 30. That's really good. But it's pretty fascinating, isn't it? Or do you think so? Do you agree?
Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
It's kind of one of those verses that you can use to really just in our debate. It was one of those verses I wish I would have had on hand to debate against the Mayavadi.
But do you find opportunities to sort of debate about impersonalism versus personalism?
I mean, not really. The quote unquote impersonalists, or whatever that I meet, aren't really affiliated with any lineage. It's just kind of like a pseudo impersonalism. They're not, they're not practicing seriously, and they're not quoting any shastra or anything to back it up. So
And
it's
so,
mainly
since
there's just this idea in I don't know, popular culture, popular spiritual culture of like everything is one, and but there's not really anything beyond that. There's no substance to debate against. But
I think there is not much serious Mayavadis today. I think even the conception that they have is quite vague.
yeah, right?
It's not very strong. Like earlier in those days, when the things were there, like Madhvacharya, when they fought with a lot of Mayavadis, there are a lot of I would say true Mayavadis. So they used to properly back up with a lot of Shastric quotes and all. But today, I think there's not a proper Mayavadi conception is there. But still, the worldview is more or less, I would say, impersonal.
What's the equivalent of like today's of the impersonalism today? Like I kind of talked about it at the beginning of that. What's the predominant worldview today in modern society?
I think a lot of at least Americans that are into yoga or Buddhism are they just kind of think everything is one, but they're not quoting any shastra.
Right, and that remains a pretty small number of people, in a predominant Christian country but there's something else which is not religious, but which is blatantly against our belief. It's physicalism, right? It's what we're taught in school, that that when you die, everything's finished. There's no consciousness, there's no soul, there's no spiritual world, there's no heaven, there's no hell. It's all chemical, it's all neurons and protons in the brain. That's the big enemy, right? There is no intelligent design.
And people always say we have only one lifetime to live, everything will be done,
Right.
Life is short, only one lifetime.
Right.
I think science don't have any answer to the origin of consciousness. So I think that is the main point.
Yeah,
because
that's
of
a
which
good
people
place of attack.
have a lot of physicalism and all those things comes. But then if we have an origin, I find the origin of consciousness, and we can trace the individuality and the concept of whole personalism and all.
Let's go to 213. Thank you, Vignesh. Good point. So, in 213, that super famous verse about reincarnation, what is it specifically that the self-realized soul is not bewildered by? Was anyone confused about that question, or anyone want to answer?
I said the self-realized soul is not bewildered by death of the body.
And so the change that Krishna is referring to here is the change of body, you would say, right?
Yes.
Yeah, Sorel?
I said yes.
Yeah, okay, I thought that was Golokananda Priya. Now in 215, let's go to 215. Jacob, please read the verse.
Hold on a second. 215. O best among men, the person who is not disturbed by happiness and distress and is steady both is certainly for liberation.
So, can you answer that question? How does one not get disturbed? Because Krishna is telling us, okay, we shouldn't get disturbed, right, by happiness and distress, and one who's steady in both. But okay, that sounds good, but kind of easier said than done. So what's the solution? What's the process?
Our faith must be in something that isn't affected by the material ups and downs, and so we have to be established in Krishna consciousness, ideally, doing devotional service, in order to and be attached to that service, and that's what's going to help us to navigate the ups and downs.
Very good point.
Because that service is eternal, and it isn't subject to fluctuations.
Right. Yeah. Did you all read that section on the term bhutva?
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyone inspired? Maybe Vignesh, tell us, how bhutva only applies to embodied souls, not to Krishna, and just unpack this really cool point that if we hadn't read, I assume, unless you're a Sanskrit scholar, and even then you probably don't think about this specific point unless you've read that section from Hridayananda Maharaj's Bhagavad Gita study guide. You wouldn't have thought about it. At least I haven't thought about it, in 27 years of reading the Bhagavad Gita. I think it's a brilliant point. So what is that point, Vignesh ji?
Yeah. So basically, when I just read, even for me as well. So I think it breaks the word into a root word of bhutva, which means bhu, which means to become something which we were not earlier. Now we are suddenly become into something. So I think this very fact cannot apply to a spirit soul, because by nature spirit soul is eternal. It has no beginning or no end.
Unbecoming.
But it is to become something. So
and this becoming, can you say a few more words about becoming? In what sense is that implied? What does that mean? Becoming.
It's basically we have embodied, as a soul, we are a spirit soul. We don't have any attachment to anything material. But when we get embodied by the influence of three modes, then we become a jivatma, and that is like an embodiment which refers to bhutva. But unlike there is an embodied, when we become embodied with the influence of the three modes.
So you're talking about the identity of the new body that we're in.
Yes.
That persona.
That has a material body that we take. I think that is what I consider, because naturally the soul cannot have any beginning or end. So
right.
It cannot become into something else.
Exactly.
So it has to be the material body, which changes every time.
Is that clear for Sorel and for Jacob? And
yeah,
it's all clear, right? So that's so cool, again, I challenge you to have one person in your entire life who's going to, argue at that specific level of grammar from the Bhagavad Gita, where even in India, like Vignesh just told us, you won't even find someone like that. But hey, it just increases your faith. It increases my faith, that sort of grammatical consistency that you find in the Gita, which, again, confirms what Prabhupada's telling us, that, Krishna and we are one in some way, but we're also different, and Krishna is never called an embodied or a bhutva, right? Anyone want to add anything on that, or? Okay, so let's go to 231. Let us go to 231. And who feels inspired to answer here? Sorel, what did you answer, if I may ask?
Yeah, for sure. I said, so the question is, on what grounds is Arjuna told to fight? What does religious principles mean here? I said that he is told to fight on the grounds that he is a Kshatriya and it's his duty. And religious principles here are meaning that even if he's killed on the battlefield, he'll go to the heavenly planets as their destinations. So anybody's killed on there. Basically, the killings in the battle aren't acts of violence, because even those who are killed end up benefiting from the battle. And that's what I thought the religious principles meant.
Does anyone have a different, thank you, does anyone have a different view on what religious principles would mean here?
It can also mean the qualities of a Kshatriya, like
The
heroism
dharma of a
and
kshatriya,
power.
huh?
So he has a lot of qualities that should know. He should fight for the same qualities that he has.
Krishna talks about those in the 18th chapter, right? Right? The qualities of a kshatriya.
Yes.
Yeah. We'll get to that, in a few chapters. Now here we're kind of close to this. I wanted to talk about this in the class. Here's a story, and tell me what you guys think. When I just got the Gita for the first time, I was 20 years old in Paris, and I was just like, wow, devouring it. And I bought a copy and I gave it to my best friend at the time, Jérôme Castagnaro, who lived across from me. He lived in another building, me in another building, and we had a courtyard separating us. And I'll always remember, so I was, brand new. I hadn't even read the whole thing. And I gave it to him as a gift. You got to read this. You got to read this. This is it. And then I remember a few days later, he came back and he said, what's the difference between this, where God is, he was intelligent. He got the basic storyline. And he's like, what's the difference between this book where God is telling a human being to kill for the sake of God, and Muslim terrorists who, do some terrorism and say Allahu Akbar? And you know what? I was floored. I didn't know what to say. So what would you, Prabhu, say?
I think we could refer to Swadharma and just recognizing that Vedic society was kind of structured to engage whoever whatever particular class you were in service that benefited the whole of society. So a warrior, his Swadharma is to be a warrior. And if he chose not to do so, then he would be being selfish by doing that.
Well, one could say, to counter that, what's the difference? In Islam, you have these, God fighters, God warriors, who also believe that by, killing the miscreants, so to speak, they're benefiting them, they're benefiting the earth, and they're pleasing God, and they're doing their religious duty. Any other argument?
Could one argument be that in that sense, though, they're killing innocent people, versus in this particular battle, it's also the duty of the Kauravas on the other side as well. Like that's also, they're playing an equal part in it too.
Sorel makes I have to say, a point that I think is very good, and that's one of the only points I sort of can come up with in 3 decades, and that is, according to the code of of fighting, code of war in these times. I mean, the Mahabharata tells us, right, that there were strict codes of fighting where those who actually fought were, professional soldiers, professional warriors. So, and far away from the cities or the villages. So no, there were no innocent victims. All the children, all the women, all the, they were all like spared. And that's huge, compared to like these, what's it called?
Child bombers.
There was this cartoon I saw where there's this one frame, and it's called the Terrorist Academy, and the course is called Suicide Bomber 101. And so there's just this guy with a big old beard, and he's got all these explosives set up around his body, and he's got a detonator in his hand, and there's like 20 students taking notes, and he tells them, okay, pay close attention because I'm going to do this only once. So yeah, it's pretty cowardly, right? Hey guys, I deserved a laugh. That was a damn good joke. Even my brother, who's like this hardcore meat-eating Catholic, found it hilarious. But I guess in America, you're so far away from Islamic terrorism that can't relate. But you know, Vignesh should, because you're right over there in India. Anyway, sorry I said that. You made a good point, Sorel, this idea of innocent people. Any other point that would distinguish, you know, Krishna telling Arjuna to kill from Muslims saying that it's Allah telling them to kill?
I think maybe it also depends on the interpretation that we do with our own scriptures. Like, for example, there are a lot has been misunderstanding with regard to the meaning of the word jihad. So I think that has also caused a lot of violence because of the misunderstanding of what is written and what people understand for their own ulterior motives.
Well, that's to be debated, you know, because there's a tendency there's definitely a tendency to water down the severity of jihad, but there's other interpretations, you know, who say no, actually there is a very political agenda in the term jihad, and no matter how nicey academic, yes, you know, Muslims are our friends kind of interpretation, you can't avoid this very explicit political agenda in it. I'm not saying that's true, but I'm just trying to be objective and say that there's even a counter argument to what you just said. What about the idea that the Battle of Kurukshetra ultimately was a last resort? First of all, remember, there's all sorts of peace attempts made first. So it was like, okay, this is the last resort we have. And also it was to protect Dharma, right? Because like there were actual demons, you know, attacking the earth. So of course one could say, well, hey, you know, the miscreants are also demons, and we are, you know, here to save the world from the Muslim miscreants. I don't know, unless you have other points. Sorel's point, I think, is really actually a very solid one, you know, just these simple codes of conduct. I mean, the Mahabharata says, you know, when the sun set, the battle stopped, no matter who was winning. And isn't it, Vignesh, you know, and Golokananda Priya, I'm sure you've read the Mahabharata more than me, and perhaps more than Sorel and Jacob. There's passages, right, where the sun sets, and during the day they were killing each other. They're trying to kill each other and like fight to the death. Sunset, the conch blow, and then they invite each other to the opposite camp to have dinner together. And we're supposed to accept this as you know, a historical truth. This is what actually happened. They would literally invite each other over for a feast and be treated as guests of honor, you know, and then escorted back to the opposite camp. Next morning, sunrise, the conch blows, and they're out there trying to kill each other. It's inconceivable, isn't it?
It is kind of a game, no? It's like very controlled, played in a very controlled atmosphere.
Yeah, but very noble, very noble.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll go on until 15 after. Are you guys okay with that? It's 15 extra more minutes for you, and you can totally say no. You all right?
I'm fine.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll meet up again. Jai. Haribol.
Both.
Jai. So we have a short 15 minutes. I suggest we go to 232. That's okay with you, Prabhus. Sorel touched upon the answer to this question early on. And it's pretty self-explanatory, but it's important that we're sure that we know what we're talking about here. how is it that fighting would benefit, fighting would be for his benefit in either case? So maybe Sorel, don't answer because you kind of answered it if you Prabhus remember. Maybe Jacob G.
How would it be for Arjun's benefit?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, in my answer, I just wrote that if he wins the war, he'll enjoy an earthly kingdom, and if he were to die, he'd be elevated to higher planets for having executed his duties as a warrior.
Right. And what's the benefit of being on higher planets?
What's the benefit? I'm not sure.
Really?
Heavenly pleasure. Mm.
More
Man.
facility for
Huh?
more facility for self-realization. I don't know.
Oh, more facility for sense enjoyment. It's just a much higher grade of sense gratification and much less suffering. So you win. It's kind of a material consideration. You win the battle, you party, you party down here, and you die, you party up there. So
Is it harder then though? If like, okay, so if the sense gratification is more enjoyable up there, then does it make it harder to like
to be Krishna conscious?
yeah.
Yeah, that's why you could almost ask, like, is Krishna's, this can't be Krishna's like ultimate, argument in his deck of cards of arguments that he's giving Arjuna, because it is undeniably somewhat material, if we could dare say that, right? You would enjoy an unrivaled kingdom on earth. Like, well, what if you're not a devotee doing that? Like, I mean, it seems like it's somewhat of a material reward. And opening the doors wide to the heavenly planets, we're talking damsels, the women who are more beautiful than anything we can imagine here, and you immediately have you're born. I guess it depends on which planet, but Prabhupada does talk about how at least on one of these heavenly planets, it's not like you have to go through the growing pains, puberty, the whole 9 yards. You're born, and whoop, within a very short time you're like a 16-year-old or 22-year-old, and that's how you stay like for thousands of years, and then you die with painless in that youthful body. But again, that's what does that have to do with pure devotional service, right?
That's why I was kind of confused, because I don't know, in terms of Krishna consciousness, I'm not sure if that's really a benefit.
Right. But here he Prabhupada says it explicitly right here. He says, considering all aspects, Arjuna had no reason to refrain from fighting. If he should conquer his enemies, he would enjoy the kingdom. And if he should die in the battle, he would be elevated to the heavenly planets whose doors were wide open for him. Fighting would be for his benefit in either case. So it is somewhat of that's why we would have to conclude it's his argument of like hey, fight because I'm God, and it's your nature to fight anyway, and I want you to do this, and it's for it's for upholding dharma, and for you to assist me in my mission to protect the righteous and to uphold dharma. That sounds a lot more noble and Krishna conscious, right? But there's also, I guess, there's some sort of material perks to it too, right? And I think it's sort of it has to do with our skewed conception of how death can only be a bad thing. Especially death, like if you die, oh my God, that's it, you've lost it. But these people believed in reincarnation so much, and they believed in the existence of higher planets so much, that they were like, yeah man, kill me right now, like let's go, like I'm ready to go to the heavenly planets. Okay, here, just not that they would throw themselves at their enemy like some people throw themselves at cops, like it's one way of committing suicide is to go towards a cop with an armed weapon, and then they shoot you, and that's how you kill yourself. So I don't think it was kind of like, yeah man, go ahead, kill me, because I'm going to enjoy the heavenly planets as soon as you kill me. But they still thought that, hey, even if we die, we're going to enjoy up there. So I guess there's a strong belief in reincarnation. Okay, let's talk a little bit about honor and dishonor. 234. Does someone want to read that?
People will always speak of your infamy, and for a respectful person, dishonor is worse than death.
Yes. So what are we, how is it? How and why?
You want me to? Okay. Dishonor is worse than death because if Arjuna doesn't fight, even if he does die, then he is at least then he's not. So if he dies, then he's at least like doing his duty. If he chooses to not fight, then he's neglecting his duty. And that's considered sinful because they're given to him by Krishna, and also his reputation as a fighter would be gone too.
His reputation as a fighter?
Yeah. And then I put lots. I wrote more. I said if he chooses not to fight, then he is saying that he is more important than his duty. Like he's chickening out. He's becoming cowardly.
Right. I mean, doesn't Krishna himself say people will speak about your infamy? So like people are going to make fun of you, as someone who chickened out, precisely. Now I wanted to bring in a passage from the 4th canto of the Bhagavatam that's pretty close to this thing of being honored and dishonored being worse than death. In the 4th canto, remember the story of Bali Maharaj and Vamana, who's not familiar? Prabhu?
Not sure. You have to, once you start telling them, then I'm usually like, oh, okay.
Okay, remember this? I mean, Golokananda Priya, you're familiar with that story, right? The 3 steps of land, Bali Maharaj.
Oh, yeah.
Golokananda Priya is muted. I have to ask her to unmute.
Okay, I can unmute myself. Yeah, Bali Maharaj. Bali Maharaj was the king of the demon. Then,
right. So
Lord Vishnu came as Vamana Deva like a dwarf and like a Brahmana and begged for him for some, for some donation to give some, Viksha. And he asked him free step of the land, and his spiritual master said, no, you should not give. He's Lord Vishnu.
Now,
and
yeah, okay.
And he asked him, you should not give this donation to Vamana because he's a supreme Lord. He's Lord Vishnu. He's going to take away everything from you. And Bali Maharaj said, I already gave my word and I cannot refuse.
Okay, so there you go. So this thing about words. So he tells Vamana, okay, fine, you can take 3 steps, right? And then Vamana takes the first step, takes the second step, but then he expands himself so large that there's no more place to put his 3rd step, right? So what does Bali feel at that point? It's weird. It's inconceivable to us because these are examples of such unbelievable devotion. Like he's just given everything to the Lord. He's lost his guru because his guru just told him, like his guru turns out to be a demon and tells him, hey, don't worship Vamana. He's Vishnu. He's going to take everything from you. Bali is like willing to sacrifice his guru, which is the right choice to do. I mean, if your guru is a demon and you're a devotee of Krishna, you'll easily, you'll reject your guru. But still, it must be traumatic. I mean, you have a relationship with this person who's your guru, and you're like, sorry, I'm not accepting you as an authority anymore. And then his demon guru's prediction sort of comes true. At the end, after having, said, yes, please take whatever you want, even if it's just 2 steps, the Lord takes everything, including, his entire kingdom, and he ends up being, tied with the ropes of Varuna, like a prisoner. And Bali's he's not like, oh no, what is this crap? Like, damn, I gave you everything. No, he's feeling guilty and he's feeling bad about what? That he wasn't able, and Golokananda Priya, you mentioned it, he wasn't able to do what?
to keep his words that he, whatever he's promised to give, whatever he was asked to give him, like as a duty of somebody who come to beg, a Brahmana especially, you're supposed to, give whatever they ask. That in Vedic time, and he decided to give himself. He said, "You can place your said step on my
There's one thing where I'm
head."
looking for. Specifically, he felt bad about not being able to fulfill his promise. And he felt, and that's where he's like, oh my God, this is, what are people going to think of me? It's very similar to what Krishna is telling Arjuna here. People will make fun of you because you basically chickened out, you didn't do what you're supposed to, and so on. And so Bali is feeling the same thing. And he said there's nothing more scary for someone than to be untruthful, to not tell the truth, or to give a promise and to not fulfill it.
Yeah, I don't know what by Maharaj about. I don't remember that part.
Yeah, that's
And
one
he
of his
felt
famous
bad.
verses.
Yeah, he felt bad that I already promised I cannot give. That's all I know.
Yeah, and I can't give him my third, he
What
can't take that third step. So put it on my head, please. Like,
what people will say, I don't remember that. So maybe
yeah,
we can talk
I'll
about
find there, because we're looking at these verses in New Mayapur right now, and some devotees spoke about it a few days ago, last week, and I thought about it in this connection to this class. Yeah, so have you experienced it sometimes? Being embarrassed or being humiliated. Who's experienced being humiliated? You have?
Yeah.
So, it's supposed to be worse than death. One who has been honored, dishonor is worse than death.
It's very painful.
Welcome to the material world.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Prabhu,
I think in India there is one famous like proverb, like it's in Tulsidas Ramcharitmanas, which says that "Pran jaye par vachan na jaye." It is spoken by Lord Ram. "Pran jaye par vachan na jaye." So let my life be. I can give him my life, but I cannot give him my words. So whatever words I have given, I will adhere to it.
There you go. You found the verse. You found the verse.
That was from Tulsidas Ramcharitmanas.
Oh,
it's quite famous in India.
Can you
Very
say
famous saying in India. Pran jao par vachan na jaye. Vachan mean whatever you promise, your speech.
Yeah, promise.
Can you say that again by Tulsidas?
Tulsidas Ramcharitmanas, "Pran jaye par vachan na jaye."
Okay, can you give us a translation again?
Yeah, pran means like it's a life. Like I can give my life. I can die, but I cannot give my words. If I committed to my words, I will definitely fulfill it, even at the cost of my life.
Very good. Okay, Prabhus, we'll stop because I don't want to take your time. It was my mistake. Please forgive me for that 45 minutes of lost time. And I wish you a great week, and pray that we can stay Krishna conscious one more week. Jai.
Jai.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Bye, Prabhus. See you next week.
Krishna.
Take care.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Oh, you know what? Hello? Oh,
Yeah.
Why don't we do a little 5-minute kirtan? Is that okay? Can someone lead for 5 minutes or 3 minutes?
I can
Vignesh.
lead.
Huh? You're late? Golokananda Priya, you have to go somewhere?
Okay. Yeah.
Well,
Hare.
okay. Okay, then everyone mute each other, everybody mute ourselves except for Golokananda Priya.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Haribol.
Jai, that was wonderful. Thank you for bringing a wonderful mood to our class.
Your Guru Maharaj melody also, isn't it?
Bhakti Charan
You sing that this melody a lot.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, Jai Prabhu's
Hare Krishna.
next week. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.